coming to the conclusion of Book 4, The Guardians of the Universe. Illustration, Ombricken North as they are converting the lunar lapidary rocket ship into the central core of the new city of the Golden Age at the North Pole. How did we get Santa Claus? There you go. Grandpa reading here. After this, there's one more book in this series, and then I'm going to go on to something else. However, don't need to talk about that right now. Chapter 26, A Few Rich Ticks of the Clock. Sanderson Snoozy was a luminous being. He was infused with shards of starlight, which made him glow rather brightly. This would be a problem if he was to sneak into the dark of Pitch's cave. The bats that clung to the bony tree limbs around the cave's opening noticed him the moment Mother Nature's clouds had left. He was dangerously exposed, and he knew it. The bats fluttered their wings and were about to sing out in alarm. Sandy was quick. With the flick of one wrist, he sent a fog of dream sand that put every bat into a deep and instantaneous sleep. The creatures dropped from the trees by the hundreds, thumping lightly on the ground. There was a quiet hum of snoring bats as Sandy crept into the cave. The strange curling rocks at the mouth of the cave gave way to a long tunnel-like chute. Sandy spotted something in the shadows, something wispy and dark. He whipped his right hand at it. A bullet of dream sand shot toward the thing. There was a light psst as the sand hit its mark. Sandy flew down to inspect the target. It looked like a dream pirate, only a bit smaller and somehow more vaporous. One of Pitch's nightmare men, thought Sandy. It was fully asleep and exactly what Sandy needed. He cloaked himself with the nasty dark creature, completely covering his glow. Now he could proceed unseen. The inky dark of the cave was nearly total, but Sanderson Snoozy could make out the faintest light emanating from the floor below. He slipped past dozens of nightmare men without notice, leaving just enough dream sand in his wake to make sure they were put to sleep. This rescue would be difficult, and he needed every advantage in order to succeed. As he came to the cave's bottom, the light grew only slightly brighter. Snoozy was very comfortable with darkness. He'd spent eons in the black of space, and he dwelled most of his time in the land of dreams with his eyes shut. In fact, the only real weakness he had was in staying awake. He could fall asleep with such ease and quickness that on occasion it was a problem. As he peered around the edge of the cave's tunnel and into its main cavern, he felt the telltale twinges of sleepiness starting to lull him. He shook himself awake, not realizing that in just a few more steps, he would see something that would jar him awake completely. He found the source of the cave's only light. It came from a girl, a brown-haired girl who lay sleeping on a coal-colored slab of marble that had been carved into a coffin-like shape. Katherine, it had to be. And he could see that she was breathing. She was alive. But what was that around her? He crept closer. She was surrounded by an unearthly glow. This glow fascinated him. It twisted and spiraled around Katherine like a living thing, and within it, he could see the shifting shapes of tiny nightmare men, dozens and dozens of them. Whoa. Must be some sort of shield, Sandy thought, feeling a deep unease. Was it to keep her dreams from getting out, or to keep nightmares in? Perhaps it was both. Or perhaps it tripped some sort of alarm. He stepped back. He thought he knew everything there was to know about dreams, good or bad, but this shield had him stumped. He scanned the room. There was no sign of any other nightmare men or of Pitch. He was certain the room was empty except for Katherine, so he cautiously lowered his dream pirate cloak. If it's an alarm or a trap, so be it, he decided. If I act quickly, I can get out of this cave before anyone can nab me. And so he crept forward once more. Looking down at the sleeping girl, he saw that she had a lovely face, but her brow was furrowed, her expression almost tortured. She's having a nightmare. Then he looked closer. Small, glowing nightmare men were being sucked into her nose and mouth with each breath. His heart began to pound. She has no way of waking. Pitch has doomed her to an eternity of nightmares. Sandy fumed. The fiend. Heedless. Heedless of potential dangers, he tried to reach through the glowing dome of nightmare light that surrounded Katherine, but his hand was deflected by a painful burst of energy. He snatched his arm back and cradled his blistered hand. He forced himself to keep his mind clear, to not lose his temper. To him, dreams were precious, noble things. Seeing them twisted into something evil was an abomination. If Sanderson had grown more powerful during his centuries-long sleep, then evidently so had Pitch. Sandy knew he'd had to be clever and quick to get Katherine from this place. He was certain he'd be discovered at any moment. But how to remove her? Any effort to break through this formidable shield of nightmares would take time and draw attention. Ideas bombarded him, but none were correct, and he was stymied. He noticed a slight brightening of light behind him. Pitch has caught me, he thought, his heart sinking. Still, he spun around and shot streams of dream sand from each hand at whatever was sneaking up on him. The darts of sand were deflected easily, and in the scattered dust, Sandy saw not Pitch, but Nightlight. Nightlight, with his diamond-tipped staff in one hand and a fistful of just-caught dream sand in the other. The boy smiled at Sanderson Mansnoozy. Sandy was torn between feeling relief at not being caught and feeling a little perturbed. He felt he had been quite specific when he told the guardians not to follow him. Still, he couldn't deny he was glad to see this strange, glowing boy. He was also very curious as to why the boy had not been affected by the dream sand. Why had it not put him to sleep? Nightlight had had an intuition that Mansnoozy might lead him to his Katherine, and also that the little fellow might need a bit of help. He'd slipped away from the other guardians at the North Pole and had been tracking the dream captain from a discreet distance, but he knew it was time to take action. Without saying a word, Nightlight leaped forward with his staff and slashed at the base of the coffin-shaped rock upon which Katherine lay. With a single stroke, the diamond-tipped staff cut through the stone completely. Amazing, Sandy thought, looking on with surprise. Nightlight enjoyed the little man's astonishment, as did the moonbeam in his staff, but the moonbeam suddenly sensed danger. It flashed a warning to Nightlight. The moonbeam remembered this place well, didn't his boy? The moonbeam had found Pitch here, pinned through his black heart to the very same rock on which Katherine was now entombed, pinned by the diamond dagger in which the moonbeam now lived. Nightlight's dagger. Sanderson turned to the moonbeam, hearing its thoughts. He could see all the details of the memories that flooded through this brave little flash of lunar light, and as Sanderson Mansnoozy listened, he became sleepy, then sleepier. And in one more blink, he was dreaming the moonbeam's memories about how the moonbeam came to be the light of Nightlight's staff and the amazing story of Nightlight himself. It all happened in an instant, as thoughts and dreams often do, but what a rich few ticks of the clock this proved to be. Chapter 27 of Moonlight and Moonbeam and the Power of a Good Night Kiss. The power of a good night kiss. Sandy heard the memories of the moonbeam exactly as the young light remembered them. I was tumbling down like, the moonbeam began, into this dark place. I sees things that first time in the cave dark, all shadowy and nightmare-like. The cave dark looks like now, except the pitch was there, on this same rock, the nightmare rock where he was trapped for all that time. That rock must have dust and darkness of the pitch's hate living in it still, trapping Nightlight's Katherine, making Nightlight's Katherine dream the nightmares terrible over and over, on and on. The thinking of it is a cold horror. I'm remembering the last time I felt that same cold when I went into the diamond dagger, the one that appeared through the pitch, the one that speared through the pitch's cold heart and into the stone and held the pitch prisoner, kept him so he wasn't alive or dead, just there. This is the moonlight remembering. All the while inside the dagger was my boy Nightlight, surrounded by the coldness awful. For almost longer than ever, it froze my boy. It made him still and made his memories separate from him. But my light warmed him and wakened him and made my Nightlight boy free. He broke out of the diamond cause of me. He needed a bit of the moon's light to make him strong again. But the diamond traps me as it does any magical light that comes into it. But I'm not minding, because I know I helps the Nightlight be free, and he should be free. He's the hero of us all, but none really knows the all of his story, only me, cause his memories stayed there here in the diamond, and I can feels them. Some knows he was a friend to the man in the moon. Some knows about his battling with the pitch, but only I knows what came before that. Nightlight was the guard of the baby prince of the moon. The Nightlight was a special being, the only one there ever was, a boy of light who would live forever and never grow old, and he would always protect the royal young of the golden age, especially from nightmares. He would never sleep and be always watchful. But he was doomed to heartbreak. Doomed to heartbreak. For though he cherished and cared for the prince, there would be a sadness time when the prince would become grown and need him no more. And so sorrow would be his life until another child was born to rule, and then the joy and heartbreak would begin again. But Nightlight knows this and takes the burden, and every night he stayed and protected the sleep of the prince baby. Every night the Nightlight waited for the mother queen and the father king to come, give the kiss good night to their prince, the magic kiss of the good night. So powerful is this kiss, takes away all the hurts, makes the scare and sad go to nothing. My Nightlight has that power too, but he don't know of it. He can't ever give it and stay a Nightlight, but his magic is like the parents, and when they leaves after the kiss, my Nightlight boy says his song. Nightlight, bright light, sweet dreams I bestow. Sleep tight all night, forever I will glow. Then he sprinkles dream sand over the prince and watches all the night, every night, never to sleep, my Nightlight boy. And he kills any nightmare from the pitch that could do the princeling harm. But then the pitch so terrible comes, and the father king and mother queen, they know the pitch will take their boy. To end the golden time, the pitch must do away with the baby prince. So they give Nightlight an oath. Watch over our child. Guide him safely from the ways of harm. For he is all that we have, all that we are, and all we will ever be. And all around the pitch is battling terrible, and he captures the mother queen and the father king, and the Nightlight hides the prince, but the baby is fearful. The prince baby cries, and this hurts my nightlight's soul. My nightlight, he takes the prince baby's tears, he holds them tight like treasure next to his heart thumping, and he says the oath, and that makes a magic thing. My nightlight's hand, the tears burn it. They burn till my boy can't stand it, but he does. And then the tears, they change. The tears, they become strong. The tears, they become the diamond dagger. And my nightlight knows that only he can use this dagger to end the pitch. My nightlight knows he will likely die and never see his prince again. So he whispers nice, so nice to the prince baby. Remember me in dreams. And he flies off to face the terrible pitch. And stop him he finally does. And crash here they finally did. And Nightlight felt cold for longer than any should inside that cold heart of the pitch. He still will never grow up or old, and all the ones he loves will grow past him and leave him. But he must always stay the same. But he remembers almost none of this, which is my doing. I held on to his memories so he wouldn't know all his hurts, so he won't be made sorrowful. So me, and now you, knows of how grand he is in the history of the brave and good. Chapter 28, Nightlight has a memory and the dream sand does its stuff. Knowing they needed to make their escape, Nightlight leaned down to the fresh cut in the stone and opened his fistful of dream sand. He held it palm up and blew the sand with one gentle breath. The sand settled quickly into the slice, and once the last little grain had slipped in, the entire block of stone magically lifted a foot or so into the air. But of course, thought man Snoozy, having snapped awake as soon as the moonbeam's story had ended, making an instant connection. Nightlight remembers the powers of dream sand, if nothing else. Sandy instantly added his own stream of dream sand, and soon a sparkling cloud formed under Katherine's stone bed, lifting it even higher. It was time to leave. They were certain to be seen now. Nightlight peered in at Katherine and felt an awful ache. She looked so sad. His beautiful friend was imprisoned in almost the exact same place where he had been. He hated the feelings this brought into his heart. Sandy let the sand continue to stream forth, its glow brightening the room like sunlight. As Sandy had anticipated, alarms began to sound. The rumble of approaching armies of nightmare men and fearlings rang out from every part of the cave. Man Snoozy himself wasn't alarmed. He knew that the magic of the dream sand cloud was potent, and sure enough, in an instant the three of them flew up and out of the cave and into the evening sky. They could already see traces of the northern lights of North's faraway tower, showing them the way to safety. The nightmare men tried to follow, but a trail of dream sand put all of them to sleep. Our heroes had made their escape. It had been fairly easy, really. Pitch was nowhere in sight. Chapter 29, A Sea of Nightmares and a Helping Hand. Katherine was asleep and silent within the energy of the nightmare stone that was now being sped toward the North Pole. She could nonetheless tell that something was happening outside the nightmare world she'd inhabited for days, weeks. She had no way of knowing. Night, day, twilight. She was oblivious to the real world, for from where she now dwelt was always half past terrifying. At least now she believed she'd been dreaming, that the terrors that hunted her were only nightmares, but they seemed so real, so sharp and true as life, and their fearfulness just as strong. But something had changed. In the dream she was now dreaming, she was on an endless and stormy sea. The water was as black as tar and the sky heavy and dim with clouds. She was floating in North's sleigh, but it was rotting in the water and slowly falling to pieces. The waves, huge and coming to mountain top like peaks, weren't cresting, but rather each one rose and fell at a continuous roll that was dizzying. Floating past her were all the people and things she knew and loved. North's horse, Petrov, the giant bear of Santov Clausen, all her young friends, Petter, Fogg, Sasha, and all the Williams. They were as stiff and lifeless as driftwood. They could not help her, nor she them. More friends bobbed by. The spirit of the forest, the warrior eggs, the owls, the reindeer, then Ombrick, North, Bunnymund, Toothiana, and even her beloved Kailash. But not Nightlight. That was her only relief. At least Nightlight had been spared. Then the dark, murky sky above her flashed and brightened like an exploding star. She glimpsed a hand, a huge hand. It was visible for only a moment, but she was able to see it distinctly. Golden colored, glistened like sand. It was the first bright and hopeful thing she'd seen in all her nightmare journeys. She reached up for it, toward it. It was so close. She lunged and just grazed the tip of one gigantic finger. Then the hand vanished. The sky darkened again and the waves grew even more violent, but now there were dozens of small figures in the water around her. They were quite active, not frozen like the earlier wooden torrents of her friends. These were unfamiliar and they amused her. There were 3 mice wearing dark lensed glasses, a dish and a spoon, a leaping cow, all of them happy whimsies, compliments of a friend and ally who knew just what might be needed in this dark place. So Katherine wasn't fearful as a huge whirlpool began to form, drawing her crumbling sleigh into its swirling vortex. She would be sucked down surely. The inky spray of the tumultuous sea soaked her and made her cold, so cold. It was pitch. He was under this awful sea waiting for her. But though through the dread that now flooded her, something gave her courage. Her hand tingled. The tips of her fingers seemed to glow as if covered in something barely there. She looked closely. Is it sand? She wondered. Or just a few grains, 3, 4 at the most. Then in a blink, she thought she saw a funny little man who glittered like gold, and she could feel something else. Nightlight. Nightlight was near. As the sea closed around, spiraling her down into its wake, she felt less alone. She knew that somehow her friends were trying to rescue her. But oh, the coldness. She could feel the pitch was so close. She knew that murderous things were afoot. Chapter 30. Meanwhile, back in Santov Clausen, everyone in Santov Clausen had been a little homesick. Oddly enough, they were already home, but half the village was now at the North Pole, so the home half missed the gone half. Petrov, for example, missed his best friend Bear. They had patrolled the edges of the village together for a very long time. Thankfully, there were others to keep the gallant horse company. Many of the children now rode him on his daily rounds. They had formed their own militia. To guard the village. Sasha and Petter were the generals of this young troop. They had enlisted the other children and many of the remaining forest creatures as their captains and lieutenants. No one had a rank below captain, which was one of the fun parts of inventing your own army. The squirrels, chipmunks, beetles, ants, and butterflies all had new military-like uniforms with SC for Santov Clausen embroidered on their jackets. They had been sent by North himself and had arrived by the train tunnel that now linked Santov Clausen to his city. Every few days, an Egomotive train would arrive from the pole, sometimes to bring gifts, news, or returning visitors. 3 Williams had just come back and told everyone tantalizing stories of how North City was growing into the most beautiful place they had ever seen. An enchanted forest now surrounded the city. like the one around Santov Clausen, but the trees were evergreens. They'd never lose their leaves, and all were pointed like giant cones. They're covered with tiny egg-shaped lights crafted by Bunnyman, explained the youngest William to the others. The city itself sat atop a mountain of ice and snow and was sculpted from the same materials, at least on the outside. On the inside, the palatial towers and pavilions, the floors and walls were grown from sampled hunks of Big Root itself. On the night of what was now called the Great Migration, half of Big Root had been transported to the North Pole, but in Santov Clausen, this halving was barely noticeable, for the fantastic tree did not split in half. Rather, it divided itself into two trees. Every other limb and root had formed over a new trunk. Every other limb and root had formed over a new trunk. When the new tree flew away, the original Big Root simply shifted its remaining limbs and roots in a way that made it difficult to imagine that any part of it was gone. The new Big Root at the pole had then grown itself to take the shapes of all the rooms, stairs, and furniture in North's plans. It was now the only city in history in which every wall, chair, ceiling, and door was alive and able to change upon command. If North or Ombrick needs a chair, one will come running into place, explained tall William. And North needs a much bigger chair now, added William, the almost youngest. He's gotten kind of fat. They all laughed at the idea. The Yetis are great cooks, said tall William. North loves their chocolate and vanilla moon cookies, blurted William, the absolute youngest. White on the one side, dark on the other. Just like the moon, asked Sasha. Yep, replied the youngest William, and all good. And what of Katherine? Asked Petter. The Williams glanced at each other. Tall William spoke first. Ombrick received a message just before we left. Sandman found her. Is she all right? Asked Sasha. We don't know for sure, said not as old William. They are bringing her to the pole, said tall William. What's that? Asked Fogg, scratching his head under his SC cap. The most magicalest place in the city of North, said William, the absolute youngest, with awe. Its giant tower in the center of the city, it can do anything. It can even go to the moon, they say. That pronouncement drew a collective wow from all who listened, even the bugs and squirrels. Above them, they then saw what looked like a slowly moving shooting star arc across the twilight sky. They looked at it curiously. It was bigger than a star, they realized. It was more like a small cloud. A familiar, slightly sleepy feeling came over them all. Then they knew. It's not a star. It's the Sandy Man, said the youngest William. Yeah, and Nightlight, said Sasha. They must be traveling with our Katherine. There was a sudden feeling of hope and excitement among the group. Then we must wish them well, said Fogg. So they repeated the words that make all magic possible, the first magic words they had ever learned, the words they hoped would help Katherine. I believe, I believe, I believe. Chapter 31, The Power of the Nightmare Rock. Sandy and Nightlight were anxious to get Katherine to safety. Man Snoozy was worried that she had perhaps been trapped inside a nightmare for too long, that she might never recover from such a stream of horror. The black slab of Pitch's nightmare rock seemed to be devouring the green dream sand cloud beneath it. Sandy was using an alarming amount of sand just to keep them flying. At last, they were nearing North's new city. The luminous northern lights ebbed and flowed around them in giant, graceful waves. Sandy's fingertips still hurt from his brief attempt to break through the layer of nightmare energy that surrounded Catherine. He paused from spreading dream sand to look closely at his aching fingers. The dream sand at each tip was scorched with small black bruises that were starting to spread. He'd never before encountered any nightmare that had had such an effect on his dream sand. An odd, sudden urge now compelled him to bring his fingertips to his ear to listen, and what he heard astounded him. Tiny, screaming voices. His dream sand was being turned into nightmare sand. Each grain of blackening sand now held a nightmare. As Sandy brought his hand from his ear, staring at the spreading black, thinking of what to do, Nightlight was still watching Catherine. For much of the journey, her sleeping face had been growing ever more peaceful, but now she looked terrified. The dream cloud beneath him began to lurch and rock unsteadily. Nightlight glanced down. The bright golden sand was churning. Streaks of black began to appear through its billowing shape. Nightlight turned to Sandy, but the little man was already grabbing at him. He jerked the diamond tip of Nightlight's staff to his blackening fingers and began to furiously scrape them. Each scrape peeled the nightmare sand from his fingers. Within seconds, his hand was free of the spreading darkness, but the scraped away sand began to form into an entity, a small nightmare man, and all the sand beneath Nightlight and Sandy was darkening as the green dream cloud grew more volatile. They could barely stand as it twisted and jerked as if fighting for its soul. From both hands, Sandy shot streams of fresh sand into the cloud, but it blackened faster than he could send forth his sand. They were directly above North's amazing city now, its dazzling lights shining up around them, but they were in desperate trouble. Chapter 32, Situational Chocolates. Down below, the other guardians and all the citizens of the new city watched in awe and alarm. Just when things seemed to be going so well, said Ombrick, rolling up his sleeves and thinking through his list of fighting spells. He wondered if he was still up to the task. This is for Catherine's sake, he thought, and strength came roaring back. Time to do a little multiplication, said Queen Toothiana, fluttering her wings and clutching her ruby relic. Get my sleigh, North said to his elves. I believe this situation calls for particularly potent chocolate, said Bunnymun. Chocolate had quite an effect on the puka. It could transform him into a variety of ways, all of them extraordinary. His ears were already twitching with anticipation. Chapter 33. Guardian Glory and the Peskiness of Gravity. The cloud itself began twining around Nightlight's legs and feet, trying to pull him into its blackness. Sandy made long whips of dream sand and began to snap at them at every coiling tendril, shattering the dark attackers. Nightlight was equally effective with his staff. He stabbed and slashed at the black sand, hacking deep rips and troughs into any shape that threatened, but the cloud was possessed now. It could change faster than Nightlight and Sandy could manage. It reached out and wrapped itself around that magnificent pole. Wow. Yeah, I didn't remember that. The cloud was possessed now. It could change faster than Nightlight and Sandy could manage. It reached out and wrapped itself around that magnificent pole North was building, sending the rock that Catherine lay upon pitching forward. Sandy and Nightlight grabbed at the marble slab, trying to steady it, but each touch blasted them backward. The blackened sand beneath them began to change before their eyes. Creatures by the hundreds began to form from the dark grains, a cloud of nightmare men. They clawed and stabbed at Sandy and Nightlight in numbers impossible to vanquish. The two fought on fiercely, cutting away at the tendrils that were twisting around the pole, but they were simply outmatched by the enemy. Then, just as they were beginning to lose hope, the sky around them filled with able helpers. Queen Tuthiana and her warrior fairies, 10,000 fairies more, arrows and swords hitting every mark. At that point, Ombrick astrally projected himself into 20 places at once and obliterated the clouds of nightmare men in each place. And Bunnymund, his mighty ears twirling with the speed of a splitting atom, shot through the air like a bolt of lightning. He'd grown a dozen arms, and each held a sword made of meteor metal. Then came north on his newly crafted sleigh of his own design, flying at the speed of light and pulled by a team of the giant reindeer from the forest of Santoff Claus, and then together they smashed and blasted through the barrage of nightmare men with withering force. The power of the Guardians was awesome to behold. But the moment of triumph vanished quickly. The rock that held Katherine slipped through the faltering mass of nightmare men and fell with sickening speed toward the ground below. Chapter 34. And so they fell. There was no doubt that Nightlight was the fastest boy who'd ever lived, but he was not the strongest. As Katherine on her stone tomb plunged, Nightlight speared the dense rock with his diamond dagger. Gripping his staff, he used every ounce of his flying strength to try to slow the fall, but not even 100 Nightlights could have slowed a stone of its mass, and so they fell. Precious seconds passed as Nightlight tried desperately to smash his fist through the murky field of nightmare energy that encased Katherine. At the same time, his mind was racing, finding that place where time seems to slow and fate can sometimes lend a hand. The shield, how to break through. Can't use the diamond dagger, could hurt Katherine. How to break, how? Bits of Sandy's dream cloud. The grains that had not yet been corrupted still clung to the nightmare rock, stinging Nightlight in the face as they plunged. Several bits peppered his eyes and made him blink. There wasn't time to brush the grains away. They could not make the spectral boy sleep. Nightlight had never slept. Instead, they made him remember. Just as the Sandman had predicted. He remembered so much, so fast, all from his long ago life with the man on the moon. Treasured moments flickered by like leaves in the wind. The oath he had taken, the song he sang every night to the young prince, and the dream sand. Before the dream sand, what? What happened before the dream sand? He knew it was important. It could show him how to save Katherine. It was the most powerful thing of all. It was stronger than dreams and nightmares or diamond daggers made of tears or actions bold and relics ancient. It was the kiss. The kiss of the good night. He remembered the man in the moon's parents. Every night they'd say goodnight and kiss the baby. Then he, Nightlight, would bring the dream sand to keep the nightmares away. The kiss. It's magic. It takes away all the hurt of the day. At least that's what they told him. Would a kiss from me have any power? Nightlight wondered. There was just enough time to try. Then valiant Nightlight, hero of so many battles, faced the most bewildering moment of his endless boyhood. A kiss. How is it done? What do I do? What if I do it wrong? Something with the lips? How? Just go, go. He closed his eyes and lunged face first toward Katherine. The nightmare shield gave way like vapor. Its powers only worked against force and fear, and a kiss is neither. It is a hopeful thing. For one eternal instant, Nightlight's lips touched Katherine's, and all of Pitch's dark spells were gone. Her eyes opened. Her tortured sleep was done. The kiss made everything all right. Katherine was fine. There was no time even for a smile. Nightlight grabbed her hand and blew her away from the plummeting rock. And as it crashed to the ground, he glimpsed a gash in the stone. It was beneath where Katherine had just lain, just under where her heart had been. It was the hole his diamond dagger had left when, so long ago, it had pierced through pitch and kept them both imprisoned and asleep for ages. Nightlight felt Katherine's hand in his. He had saved her, and he had saved a part of himself, too. A part that had been forgotten. He had never felt more awake or alive. Chapter 35. Ah, a good night kiss. Growing up is an awfully big adventure. When it landed, the Nightmare Rock had blasted a crater of impressive size at the base of North City, sending the Nightmare Men retreating. Then Mother Nature swirled up a tempest so strong it sent them spiraling away and past the horizon. She gave a nod to them all from where she hovered, and then flew away before anyone could say a word. Mysterious creature, remarked North. Sandy just smiled. He knew that better than anyone. One can seldom predict the weather, said Bunnymund. Then they turned their attention to the fallen stone. Though the crater was 20 feet deep and twice as big around, the damaged ground beneath it was made of big root wood, so it instantly began to restore itself. As the other guardians gathered around the disappearing crater's edge, the floor began to level, the slab of black stone rising with it. Since the Nightmare Men had retreated the moment the rock hit the ground, the battle was, for now, over. And no sign of pitch, said North, stroking his beard. Not like him at all, Bunnyman added, sheathing his dozen swords. Tuthiana flared her wings. My human side says, beware. My other side says the same, but louder. We'll meet whatever comes, says Ombrick philosophically. As he gazed up at Katherine and Nightlight, the weariness that had plagued him seemed to pass. Having Katherine back was a tonic to him, to all of them. For now, let's bask in the victory of friends reunited. Hand in hand, Katherine and Nightlight floated down and landed gently beside the rock. The entire city rushed to the sight, and there were cheers and instant jubilation. Katherine was safe. North immediately picked her up and hugged her tightly, his laugh now as deep as his waistline was thick. You groan, bellowed the Cossack. So have you, Katherine giggled as she poked her old friend in his now ample belly. Santa Claus. Santa Claus. The hazards of Yeti cooking, explained Ombrick, who joined in the hugging. The Yetis were clustered nearby. Strangely enough, they were weeping like babies. They always do that when they're happy, chirped Mr. QWERTY, who paused from frantically writing everything down in himself so Katherine could read all about it later. That is exceedingly odd, muttered Bunnymund. I mean, it's peculiar enough when humans cry, but abominable snowmen? That's a bit much. Oh, and 12 arms isn't? Countered North. I'd have grown 120 arms to save Katherine, Rabbit replied curtly, and gave her a dozen simultaneous salutes. That was referring to how Bunnymund, after he ate the chocolate, that's how he flew up to do battle. Is that all? Bunnymund asked Toothiana, smiling. I made thousands of fairies. The rabbit sniffed and wiggled his whiskers. I hate to say it, but you have a point, Your Highness. His ears twitched like mad. I'll have to start working on a stronger chocolate. Now, if the ratio of cocoa beans to each arm is 4-to-1, then I'd need. Bunnymund's calculations were interrupted by Kailash, who waddled up between North and Katherine, honking like mad. Katherine was ecstatic to see her beloved snow goose. She hugged the massive bird's neck till Kailash pecked her. The bustle of conversation was joyous and loud and went on till dusk. Katherine was in awe of North City glittering around her. She gazed up at the turrets, admiring the exacting carvings and sculptural work, delighting over the colors, red and white stripes. North had chosen red and white stripes. And though Katherine was very happy to see it all and them all, there was no one to whom she very much wanted to speak. There was one. There was one to whom she very much wanted to speak. She looked through the crowd. Where was he? But Nightlight knew. As he brought Sandy through the excited group, Katherine motioned for the little man to come closer. He bowed as he neared her. She smiled at him, and he smiled back, his magnificent, peaceful smile. Though they'd never actually met, they knew each other well. They were comrades from the land of sleep and dreams. The other guardians began to all talk at once. Ah, said North, man snoozy, at last we actually meet. Such remarkable sand, commented Ombrick. I'm ashamed I didn't recognize it at once. I don't often dream, you know, Bunnymund told him. Pookas dream only one night in every 1,000 years. I do hope you haven't damaged my sleep cycle. Toothiana smacked one of her wings across Bunnymund's left ear. You don't have to say everything that comes into your head, she whispered. Oh, no, not you too, the rabbit said, groaning. I have to have human lessons from you and North. But one by one, they all grew quiet. They once again knew what Katherine was thinking. The great link of their friendship had finally been restored. In the silence that surrounded them, Katherine looked at Sandy. He didn't say a word. He's like Nightlight and me, she thought. He doesn't need to say much to be heard. His greatness was in his doing. He risked his life to save mine. Is there any greater gift? She'd not heard his story, but from the other guardians, she knew he was one of them, and she knew exactly what was required. Kneel, said Katherine to the little man, her voice carrying out over the crowd, and take this oath. Sandy kneeled before them. Then they all said the guardian's oath together. We will watch over the children of earth, guide them swiftly from the ways of harm, keep happy their hearts, brave their souls, and rosy their cheeks. We will guard them with our lives, their hopes. We will guard with our lives their hopes and dreams, for they are all that we have, all that we are, and all that we will ever be. The guardian's oath. From now on, said Katherine, you will be known as His Nocturnal Magnificence, Sanderson Mansnoozy Sandman, the first Lord High Protector of Sleep and Dreams, and Guardian to the children of Earth. Rise, Sandy, Sandy rose. I've traveled to every corner of the universe, he thought, but this is where I belong now. The full moon shined down upon them. Deafening cheers filled the crystal clear air. Katherine had returned. A great new city had been built. The guardians were reunited and stronger by one. The northern lights shimmered out from the North Pole and could be seen all the way to Santofclausen. Nightlight looked out at North's beautiful new city, and for the first time in his ancient life, he felt he was no longer separate from these people he'd call the tall ones and short ones. He was no longer Nightlight, the boy without a past, nor was he Nightlight, the boy of endless tomorrows. Tonight he was different. Villains had been vanquished, spells had been broken, and new spells had been made. Katherine and Nightlight stood together amid the cheering crowds. Their happiness was linked with everyone else's, but distinct. It was a private happiness that only the closest friendships know when they have weathered a great change. Nightlight took a small pouch from his pocket and gave her the words of the stories that Mr. QWERTY had cried out of her book. He had saved her past and her present, and she his. But his future, that was now, like all who grow up, a tantalizing mystery. As the moonbeam had told Sandy, he couldn't use the power of the kiss and stay a Nightlight. Change was coming. Nightlight could feel that. He was not alone. Katherine once again took his hand. Chapter 36, Nightlight at last sleeps. End of the story. The celebration lasted till very late, long past everyone's bedtime. Good dreams were had by all, even Nightlight. For the first time, the boy who never slept finally did. Such dreams. And Snoozy was amazed by their power. If only Nightlight hadn't slept. He'd have been on watch, as he always was before. He'd have seen Pitch crawl from his nightmare rock as it sat in the empty center of the city that was meant to bring about his end. Pitch's plan was almost complete. He'd read all of Katherine's memories when she was under his nightmare spell. It was he who sent the dream of North City to them. They had built everything as he had hoped. Unknowingly, the Guardians themselves had smuggled him into the one place he most needed to be. Now he would win this war once and for all. Wow. So, anyone has come on this journey with these books? That's the end of book 4. The conclusion is in book 5. Here's what the author, William Joyce, wrote. A desperate journey, the Guardian's saga, including a desperate journey to the moon itself, the great war on the dark side of the moon, the man in the moon's secret realm, the armies of moonbots, the greatest battle since the Golden Age. The Guardian's powers are tested as never before. Katherine's and Nightlight's fate unfolds. Katherine and Nightlight's fates unfold. Yay.